I was interviewing you on television a couple of weeks back.
That's right.
And you said, if you really want to understand Jerusalem, why don't you come here and see it?
And you came.
Here I am.
Mass shooting up.
Hello and a very warm welcome. Thanks very much for joining us for tonight's edition of Gravitas with me, Molly Gambhir. Our cover story tonight on Gravitas comes from India. Is the country moving towards one nation, one election? Speculation is only intensifying ahead of the parliament session. That's right. A parliament session has been called in the month of September from the 18th to the 22nd to be precise. Is the Indian government set to table the Uniform Civil Code Bill is also another question that's being asked. What is the Uniform Civil Code all about? How will it benefit India? We tell you all that you need to know about the one nation, one election debate as well, breaking it all down for you in just a bit. Also on the show for you tonight, will the Chinese President Xi Jinping skip the G20 summit to be held in India? Is China trying to convert the G20 into the G18? We get to the bigger picture. It's a tale of classic Western hypocrisy. We tell you how Ukraine is calling it out. Italy Prime Minister's partner triggers a heated controversy and faces backlash after suggesting that women should stay away from alcohol to avoid getting raped. Are female surgeons better than male surgeons? Are you in safer hands with a female surgeon? We tell you what a study says. Is India moving towards one nation, one poll? Well, speculation is rife, especially since the government of Prime Minister Narendra Modi has called for a special parliament session. This will be held between the 18th and the 22nd of September. And the government has not yet declared a clear agenda for this special parliament session. In fact, on Thursday, the Indian Minister of Parliamentary Affairs, Prahlad Joshi, announced this session, saying that this special session will have 5 sittings. There are talks about some bills being considered for this special session, including one nation, one election, Uniform Civil Code, and women's reservation. Let's just talk about one nation, one election. What should you make of it? The idea essentially is to simultaneously hold Lok Sabha polls and the state assembly elections. The idea has been mooted several times in the past, in fact. It has also been studied by the Law Commission of India. Currently, polls, whether for the Lok Sabha or for the state assemblies, are usually held at the end of their respective terms, which means 2 election cycles every year. And with each cycle witnessing voting for different state assemblies. Under the one nation, one election idea, elections for both the Lok Sabha as well as the state assemblies would be held in one single cycle. and voting presumably taking place on a single day. And to enact one nation, one poll, the government of India will need to bring forward an amendment. And once the process starts, the state elections that are in the pipeline, there are at least 5 state elections, in fact, that are going to be taking place this year. Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, Mizoram, Telangana, Madhya Pradesh, and some more states go to the polls next year. So the question is, will these elections be clubbed together and be held on a single day? It's of course too early to tell, but here's something that we can tell you at this point. All of this coming on the heels of the government's message to the Supreme Court. The Indian government has said that it is open to conducting polls in Jammu and Kashmir during the top court's hearing on petitions challenging the 2019 scrapping of Jammu and Kashmir's special status. The centre said that elections can take place anytime. The Solicitor General, Tushar Mehta, told the court that the decision will be taken by the central and the state poll panel. The potential tabling of another bill becoming interesting. The Uniform Civil Code. It's aimed at basically replacing the personal laws based on religions, customs, traditions. It essentially seeks to put in place one common law for everyone, irrespective of religion, caste, creed, sexual orientation, gender. Laws related to inheritance, adoption, succession are likely to be covered by a common code if such a bill is passed. Now, the last time a special sitting was held was in August 1997. At the time, a 6-day special sitting was held to commemorate the 50th anniversary of India's independence. And over the last few years, the government has tried to bring a sense of uniformity across sectors, be it one nation, one tax, or one nation, one vehicle registration system. You also have one nation, one ration card scheme. So will a uniform civil code be next? All eyes are on that special session. It's 18 days away, and the timing of the announcement also is very interesting, by the way. The opposition alliance is going into a huddle in Mumbai. There is no doubt the announcement comes as a surprise. And it's already being questioned by the opposition, in fact. For more on this, with us on the broadcast is Harish Bijur from Bengaluru. Bijur is an analyst and a brand guru. Thanks very much for being here. What do you make of the speculation that's doing the rounds, and where do you really stand on this debate regarding one nation, one election?
Okay, the speculation regarding an early election seems to be something real. And I don't think it makes too much of a difference whether the election happens in December 2023 or it happens a little later. But when it comes to this issue... If I can just come in at this point. Yes, the question being regarding the one nation, one election and uniform civil code. I'm coming to that.
Yes, sure.
I'm coming just to that. So if you really look at one nation, one tax, works beautifully. One nation, one language may never ever work, and one nation, one election is going to be a difficult one. Because when you look at this debate, which has been going on for decades, to say that the Lok Sabha election must synchronize with the state assembly elections, it's always been a debate about caste. It's about a waste of precious governance time. And it's also about the fact that, everything at the end of the day is an election, let it coincide with one another. Now, this is going to be a difficult one because if it's about cost, yes, there certainly is a case, because the first election was fought in 1951-52, I think, at something like 11 crore rupees. And the last election was possibly fought, we still don't know what the number is, but around 60 to 65,000 crores. So that's a big number. But the key point to debate is an election about caste or is an election about issues? is an election about issues which may or may not synchronize because we're a federal system, the system where, issues which are central may not necessarily be issues which are potent at the state level. So how do you coincide these two things is one of the big challenges and the debate.
Right. What about the Uniform Civil Code? Speculation doing the rounds on that front as well. How do you perceive it and how do you see it benefiting India if it does see the light of the day?
I think this debate is again contentious. But I think, the steps being taken are very forward-looking ones at this point of time. So let's wait for the actual debates to happen, for the actual debates to start in Parliament. But when it comes to an election, which is one election and one country and two elections, or should it be three elections in one? Because let's say there's a Lok Sabha election, there is an assembly election, and there is a city corporation election. Now, the key point again is that each of these are fought on different sets of issues. And those issues, the twain never ever meets. So I think, this debate is going to continue. So this is going to be an exciting session for sure.
What do you see the opposition strategy looking like at this point and from here onwards? We're looking at that huddle that they are also engaging in today.
Well, the opposition strategy is going to be oppose, and oppose, I guess, because that's what benefits the opposition all the time. And I think the huddle that we see today with the India team versus the other team, which is the ruling team at this point of time, there's going to be a bit of tussle for sure. Every issue is going to become contentious and expect, things to look rocky. But the point is, we need to be taking decisions which are good for India, the nation. And I think just as long as things are debated, just as long as things are taken through a process, I think we'll come to good decisions. This country has always made great decisions, and I don't think this will be any different.
All right, we're leaving it there for the moment. Thanks very much for joining us on the broadcast with those inputs and perspectives. And we are shifting focus for now to a big question. Is China looking to subvert India's G20 presidency? Is it basically trying to convert the G20 into the G18? Now, these questions pop up, all courtesy Beijing's provocative and petty actions. You see, first, it boycotted the G20 meetings hosted by India in Kashmir and Arunachal Pradesh. And then it released a map which showed Indian territories as part of the Chinese mainland. And now the Chinese president is apparently, as per reports, likely to skip the G20 summit altogether. Now, why is that? Why is China doing all of this? What exactly is it fearing? Does it fear that India will use the summit to sideline Beijing and call out its actions? Or does it fear that India could become the voice of the global south after the summit? Whatever China's real intentions might be, one thing is absolutely clear. It is waging a thinly veiled campaign to disrupt the G20 summit. A campaign to deny India the global leadership that it is seeking. And it's time that we call this campaign out. We'll start off with this report. It's a Reuters exclusive. It says Xi Jinping is likely to skip the G20 summit in India. And how does Reuters know this? Through its interactions with two officials. One is a diplomat stationed in China, and the other is an official from a G20 nation. They both say Xi Jinping is not coming. And in his place, China could send Premier Li Qiang as a representative of Beijing. And why is Xi Jinping not coming? This the report does not mention. And given China's state of secrecy about everything under the sun, it might never even reveal the real reason. In any case, Xi Jinping will not be the only one skipping the summit. Last week, remember, Russian President Vladimir Putin decided to skip the summit as well. And he will be sending his foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, instead. And why is the Russian president not coming? Well, the Kremlin says because his main emphasis right now is the special military operation, as they call it. In other words, he is busy fighting the Ukraine war. Now, I cannot help but wonder if this was all pre-planned, if it was always Xi Jinping and Putin's intention to skip the summit. And if yes, is it because of China? Is Putin not attending the summit at China's behest? How much leverage does China really hold over the Kremlin when it comes to diplomatic matters? And as we ponder over these big questions, it also helps to look at some of China's actions ever since the G20 summit was announced. You see the map showing Indian regions as Chinese, and Xi Jinping's refusal to attend the G20 summit are not the first instances of China trying to disrupt the G20 summit. In the lead up to the summit, a series of ministerial meetings in India have also been marked by serious disagreement. In one instance, Russia and China jointly resisted endorsing collective statements on the war in Ukraine. In March this year, it skipped a 2-day G20 program in Arunachal Pradesh's Itanagar. There were 100 delegates from G20 countries, but no Chinese delegation. And then in May, China boycotted a meeting of a tourism working group within the G20. Why is that? Because the meeting was held in Kashmir. And it does not even end there. China was also reportedly opposed to adopting Vasudev Kutumbakam as a key theme of the summit, a Sanskrit phrase which essentially translates to "the world is one family." A powerful and unifying message that beautifully summed up the very purpose of a bloc like the G20. Yet, China was against it. It opposed the inclusion of the phrase in almost every G20 meeting that was held under India's presidency. The excuse that Beijing gave was even more bizarre. It said that the phrase could not be used in official texts because it was in Sanskrit, which is not one of the 6 official languages recognized by the United Nations. And we thought it was India's prerogative to decide the theme as the host nation. And just this week, it released this imaginary map showing Indian territories as its own, and of course got called out for doing so. Badly, in fact. Last we checked, the Philippines, Nepal, Malaysia, they all had slammed the Chinese map. So what do all these developments really tell you? That China has some deep-seated insecurities over India's rising stature on the global stage. Especially the Indian Prime Minister, a leader who is being embraced globally, that too on both sides of the aisle. He can meet the Russian president with ease. He can even hug and greet the American president. And on the other hand, we have Xi Jinping, an unelected dictator who has an adversarial image around the world. He's tried buying good press to redeem his public perception, but to no avail really. And this can make any man insecure. And Xi Jinping is clearly no different. And there's certainly a fear within China's strategic community that India might take the home field advantage to take on China on sensitive issues. And there's also a fear that Xi Jinping could be ignored badly at the summit, given the kind of camaraderie that the Indian Prime Minister shares with world leaders. And what's worse, there will be cameras. And Xi Jinping clearly does not want to face them. All said and done, the impact of Xi Jinping's absence at the summit will be significant. If he does not participate, many issues will be left unresolved. Since China is a key member of the bloc, its lack of active participation, perhaps, could put China's international reputation at stake. And then again, who are we kidding? When has China ever cared about what the world thinks about it? Europe's hypocrisy has been exposed once again. And guess who is the one exposing the West? Ukraine. That's right. It's calling out Europe's dependence on Russian oil despite sanctions. It's exposing how diesel and other fuels refined from Russian crude continue to pour into Europe. You see, Ukraine wants the West to close this loophole and implement tighter curbs. The economic advisor of the Ukrainian president, Oleg Ostenko, has appealed to the EU, the UK, the US to take action. Ostenko urged the West basically to close the loophole that allows these countries to refine Russian crude into petrol, diesel and other products, which they can then sell, by the way, without restrictions. Now, for those unaware, last December marked a very significant event. The G7 nations decided to further punish the Kremlin for the war in Ukraine. And they reached an agreement to impose a price cap of $60 per barrel on Russian crude oil. This effectively implies that only sales below this specified price are permitted. The idea essentially was to curb the Russian war chest, to squeeze Moscow financially, and at the same time, the intention was to maintain the functioning of the oil markets. And so, countries like India are buying cheap Russian crude. India is also refining it. It earns Indian companies the refining margin. Refined oil from this process is subsequently sold to other countries. In May, Indian imports of Russian crude hit a high of 69 million barrels, a nearly tenfold increase as compared to the same period in 2021, prior to the war. Volumes have since fallen to around 50 million barrels in July, but they remain well above the pre-war levels nonetheless. And as a result, India's fuel exports to the EU have surged. In June, it exported 5.1 million barrels of diesel and 3.2 million barrels of jet fuel to the bloc, up from just 1.68 million barrels and 0.51 million barrels, respectively, in June 2021. And because of this, 5 countries, including India, have been labeled as laundromats for European countries. You heard that right. In June this year, a report published by a Finnish non-government agency called the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air called India, China, Singapore, Turkey and the UAE laundromat for the rich European countries. Can you believe that? Just the level of European smugness? The moniker only exposes the hypocrisy of the West, in fact. For all its self-righteousness and bullying of countries in the global South, along with the rhetoric, of course, of if you are not with us, then you are with them, Europe cannot seem to choose between wanting to be the conscience keeper of the world and its own material interests. I mean, they talk about punishing Russia. They impose sanctions that inadvertently hurt emerging economies, and yet they mock us for prioritizing our own needs. But in reality, the situation on the ground is this. Europe is and continues to be dependent on Russian energy, even if they refuse to admit this. Just last week, in fact, Hardeep Singh Puri, India's Minister of Petroleum and Natural Gas, said that Russia has been providing discounts. Here's what he told an Indian news channel. If there is a 30% discount, the Russians are putting a ribbon around it and sending it to us for free. He also emphasized that India, for its part, has diversified its sources of oil procurement. And for the record, data from S&P Global in July shows that India's primary sources of crude oil are from West Asia and Russia. But let's just get back to Ukraine. As the war continues to grind on, inflicting a heavy toll on the Ukrainians, Kiev aims to exert more pressure. And according to Ostenko, policymakers should endorse a ban for all refined products going to G7 countries. He basically asserts that this measure is essential if these products originate from Russian oil, irrespective of where the refining has taken place. Ostenko says Kiev wants to build support among G7 nations to bring the price cap down to just $30 a barrel. Now remember, Poland and some Baltic nations pushed for lower prices last year, but then countries like Greece, whose oil tankers transport a lot of Russian crude, expressed reluctance. The Ukrainian officials suggest that a potential ban on fuel derived from Russian crude could send out a big signal to the producers. And this signal would basically convey that touching Russian oil is entirely prohibited. It would render the supply of what Kiev terms blood money to Russia illegal. Blood money that Russia uses to buy weapons and commit war crimes on Ukrainians, by the way. However, the idea is unlikely to garner substantial support at the moment. And this is primarily due to Ukraine's request for a ban on refined fuels, particularly in the absence of a viable alternative. And our next story is from Pakistan. It's facing another threat of a civil war, and this time not due to political differences or a leader's vested interests. This time due to the alleged targeting of Shia Muslims. It all started with an FIR against this man. His name is Agha Bakir al-Husseini. He is an influential scholar and cleric, and he recently presided over a religious gathering where he spoke about Pakistan's blasphemy laws. He basically said the laws have been made stricter, apparently to target the Shia community. And soon enough, he was booked for saying this. An FIR was lodged against him. It alleged that he made objectionable remarks against Prophet Muhammad. And since then, Gilgit-Baltistan has been in the grip of unrest. Have a look at these images. They show thousands of Husseini's followers staging a protest on the streets of Skardu. They raise slogans against the Pakistan army and the politicians, and even threaten to merge with India if their demands are not met.
अगर तुम रास्ते में डाउट पैदा करोगे तो हम करगिल जाके दिखाएंगे तुम्हें खुदा की कसम अगर तुमने किबला आगा बाकिर अल हुसैनी को गिरफ्तार करने की कोशिश रही ना हम रहेंगे ना फिर तुम रहोगे.
You heard that. Neither will we live, nor will you. These are some serious slogans. They show the pent-up anger that the residents of Gilgit-Baltistan have towards the country's rulers, especially when it comes to their Shia identity. You see, Pakistan is a Sunni majority country, but in Gilgit-Baltistan, it is the Shia Muslims that form a sizable chunk of the population. And Pakistan's political leaders have been trying to bring the population down. Ever since the regime of General Ziaul Haq, there have been attempts by successive Pakistan governments to change the demographic composition of this region. And they've tried to do so by moving the Sunni Muslims into the region. And to make matters worse, in January this year itself, Pakistan strengthened its already strict blasphemy laws. It basically extended them to punish anyone who offended people connected to Prophet Muhammad. Basically, early Muslims who were the Prophet's companions, the Shia cleric in question here being al-Husseini, allegedly insulted one of the Prophet's companions because many Shias do not follow him. And this has led to the current spate of unrest. The question is, what is Islamabad doing about all of this? Basically, nothing much. The political leaders are not talking about the protests. There is also no coverage of the protests on television. This is due to the establishment's grip over communication in the region. So any information that is flowing is through social media and in the form of trickles. So the job to ensure peace has been left to the courts. On Tuesday, the Gilgit-Baltistan Apex Committee held a meeting to discuss ways to ensure peace and not let anyone disrupt the law and order. It was decided at that meeting that legal action will be taken against anyone trying to spread hate or trying to make the situation worse. We wonder what that even means. In any case, this is not the first time that Shias in Pakistan are protesting. They have done so multiple times in the past. And not without reason, of course. After all, in the last 3 years, they have been arrested or targeted for merely proclaiming their beliefs. And this time as well, the case seems to be no different. Let's now tell you about the latest in the aftermath of Hurricane Idalia. The hurricane has died down, but it has caused floods in southeastern North Carolina. Reports say the storm caused widespread power outages and at least 2 deaths. Idalia has been weakened to a tropical storm after making landfall as a Category 3 hurricane. The National Hurricane Center saying that the storm is expected to move off the coast of the Carolinas today. Although Idalia has now gotten calm, parts of Florida are still dealing with the aftermath. Our next report telling you more about this.
This is the trail of flooding and devastation left behind by Hurricane Idalia before heading for the Atlantic Ocean. The Carolinas witnessed winds at 96 kilometers per hour, but that is far less than what Georgia and Florida faced. Reports say over 300,000 people in the Carolinas, Florida and Georgia were without power.
I hear literally my fan go off, and I said, okay, the power went off. That could be the worst case scenario. And then I open my door, and I see a river outside.
Although for a short period of time, Georgia also had to face the wrath of the storm. The state witnessed the hurricane attaining Category 4 intensity. Idalia had residents trapped inside their homes, and rescue boats were used for evacuation procedures. Weather experts forecast that southeastern Georgia would receive 4 to 8 inches of rainfall. Isolated areas could even face a foot of rainfall. That was Florida submerged. Over 40,000 power workers were put on standby to help restore power in homes.
So far, there have been 262,000 accounts that had lost power have been restored, and there are more than 250,000 accounts that are currently out of power and in need of restoration.
The police have reported no casualties as of now. Although the storm has passed over the state, several Florida counties are still under evacuation orders. Officials say Idalia was the strongest storm to hit Florida in 100 years.
Yep, good thing we had the kayaks. We had to get the truck out of there. It's about to go underwater. So we're just out checking out the neighborhood, seeing if we can do anything to help.
Florida residents adapted and took out their own boats after the storm calmed down. Some said it was a good way to pass the time. Others saw it as a means to help other residents. Florida encountered winds of over 200 kilometers per hour. Many homes were wiped out. Officials said the water levels were 6 feet above normal. This is the current situation in Florida, where the Category 3 hurricane made landfall. People are able to come out and walk on the roads. Along with the rescue officials, volunteers and aid groups are working to help affected communities. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis says that the state's primary focus is now on recovery efforts.
Accordingly, the search and rescue operations have been ongoing from the moment that the storm passed in the hardest hit areas, and they've probably gone through about 70% of the areas that they need to be able to check for people that are in distress. And, so far, all signs have been positive.
Experts say that Idalia is the third hurricane and ninth named storm of this year's Atlantic hurricane season. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration says that it predicts that there would be 12 to 17 named storms this year. Climate experts say that as the Earth's climate heats up, storms will start to intensify quickly. Hurricane Idalia stands as an example, a weak tropical storm which became a Category 3 hurricane within 24 hours. Scientists say the unusually warm Atlantic temperatures increased the storm's activity. Will the warming ocean make the Atlantic hurricane season worse? Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Almost every profession has a retirement age. American doctors retire by 65 on an average, lawyers by the age of 70, police personnel by the age of 55. What about the country's top position? How do we decide if a politician is fit for office? Take Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell, for example. He is 81 years old, and yesterday he was at a press event in Kentucky. He was asked whether he would run for re-election in the year 2026. And instead of answering, McConnell abruptly froze, not for a second or two, but for half a minute. Aides attempted to prompt the senator, but in vain, and it took several more seconds for the leader to recover. Have a look at the clip for yourself.
Okay. What are your thoughts on running for re-election in 2026?
What are my thoughts about what?
Running for re-election in 2026.
That's
Did you hear the question, Senator? Running for re-election in 2026? All right, I'm sorry, you are. We're going to need a minute. Senator Benny.
Yep.
As you can see, McConnell was clearly struggling. He composed himself and went on to answer two more questions, but only after the staff repeated them for him. He did not make any comments about his health before leaving, and later a spokesperson clarified that McConnell had felt momentarily lightheaded. Now, this was the second time McConnell had frozen in just over a month. On the 27th of July, the senator was holding a press conference at the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C., and while speaking, he paused mid-sentence. He stared off into space for a good 20 seconds. Fellow Republicans asked McConnell if he wanted to return to his office. McConnell did not answer, and Senator John Barrasso then ushered him away from the podium. And when asked about what had happened, McConnell said he was fine and just felt a little lightheaded. Other than this, the Senate leader has endured at least 3 falls since February. In March, McConnell fell outside a Washington area hotel. He was left with a concussion and a fractured rib. The senator spent a week in hospital only to be transferred to a rehabilitation facility. McConnell did not return to the Senate until mid-April. It's a busy autumn legislative session. The Congress is attempting to avoid a partial government shutdown at the end of October. How will McConnell keep up, seeing the way he has been freezing or falling? The question is he even fit for the job? And why just McConnell? Next year, the U.S. will be heading to presidential polls, and both the front runners, by the way, Biden and Donald Trump, are old. Biden is approaching 81. Trump has turned 77. The U.S. president is known for his gaffes and falls. In June, at a graduation ceremony for the U.S. Air Force Academy, Biden practically tripped on air and fell. He has a long history of slip-ups, both verbal as well as physical. He has mixed up facts in his speeches, lost his train of thoughts. There's hardly anything new about it. Biden himself has admitted to his blunders. He has even called himself a gaffe machine. And while Republicans take jibes at Biden for being too old, they conveniently turn a blind eye towards Donald Trump. He also is in his late 70s, after all. And if he is elected next year, he would be 82 at the end of the term. So what ensures that he would have the mental acuity that the president of a country should have? And what can be done about this is the big question. Should politicians clear health and cognitive tests to prove that they are fit for office? Or should there be a retirement age for a country's leadership roles? And it's not just about their fitness or cognitive ability, by the way, but also about the future of the country. It's said, with old age comes wisdom, but of what use is it really? These leaders would be making decisions for the youth. They would be deciding future policies. Can they relate to 20, 30 or even 40-year-olds? Look at Jacinda Ardern. Look at Sanna Marin. They have a connection with the youth. Both are below 40. Both have been loved and celebrated as leaders. Does the world need younger politicians? Should the older ones retire after a certain point? Let us know what you think about this. I have a question for the women watching this show tonight. Have you ever been catcalled? Have you ever faced harassment? And if yes, was it blamed on you, on the kind of clothes that you were wearing, on the hour of the day perhaps that you were out, on the number of drinks that you've had? Unfortunately, victim blaming is the first resort for sexists. Women around the world face it, and now even public figures like the Italian Prime Minister's partner are openly indulging in this. Of late, there have been multiple gang rapes in Italy. Andrea Giambruno, who is a TV host, raised the issue during a live broadcast, and here's what he said. Let me just read it out for you. If you go dancing, you have every right to get drunk. But if you avoid getting drunk and losing consciousness, maybe you would also avoid getting into specific problems, because that's when you find the wolf. Here, the wolf referring to a rapist. And Giambruno believes that a woman is more likely to be raped if she's drunk. What's next? And where is this even coming from? Is having a drink or two inviting a man? Is that what Giambruno is implying? And for that matter, women who don't drink also get raped. That is the sad truth, because it's not the woman, it's always the perpetrator. And I thought we were past this basic debate. But turns out we are not. Sexists are still blaming it on women. In Sicily, a 19-year-old was gang raped by 7 men. All were aged between 18 and 22. Not only did they rape her, they also filmed the entire incident. How sick do you need to be to do that? 6 of them were arrested. 1 was a minor at the time of the attack. He was allowed to walk free after confessing. Can you believe that? What ensures the victim will be safe in the future? One of the criminals is roaming around freely. And here we have Giambruno doing commentary on national television, preaching what women should and should not be doing, advising them about how to avoid rape. Giambruno's remarks have prompted an angry response naturally. And what else did he expect anyway? Politicians, activists, influencers, all have spoken out against his problematic comments. Martina Semenzato, who heads a parliamentary inquiry into violence against women, has said, and I'm quoting, "Nothing can justify sexual violence, and the victim should never be blamed in any way." Centre-left politician Chiara Gribodu accused Giambruno of victim blaming, pure and simple. She added, "Never mind telling men, the real culprits, not to rape." Social media influencer Chiara Ferragini complained on Instagram that it was not wolves that women had problems with, but men, and rightly so. Condemning rapists as beasts and wolves and then going ahead and lecturing women does not add up. But that's exactly what Jim Bruno did. Jim Bruno is crying foul. He is saying that the critics have taken his words out of context. And his partner, the Italian Prime Minister, is maintaining silence. What can she even say? And it's not just Andrea Giambruno. Another public figure has made inappropriate remarks. The French Justice Minister, Éric Dupond-Moretti. A woman was being prosecuted for sexual exhibitionism after she walked topless in the street. And she said that she went topless because it was too hot outside and half the men had done the same. The Justice Minister said, and I'm quoting, "I have noticed that none of the women journalists asking questions today were standing bare-breasted in front of me. Maybe it wasn't hot enough," quote unquote. These remarks were made after a press briefing to reporters. Whatever the context was, do men in power get to say whatever pleases them? Can they just get away with sexist and highly inappropriate comments like these? Can they also preach women over rape and how to stay safe? Why not check their own behavior? Why not blame the criminal instead of the victim? And before you say not all men, please think about it. If you visit a hospital, would you prefer a male or a female doctor? Who would you feel more comfortable with? Studies say patients see better outcomes with female surgeons. Doctors have reviewed over 1 million medical registers and discovered that patients face fewer problems after being operated upon by a female surgeon. But how are female surgeons achieving better results, and what makes them better when it comes to carrying out these surgeries? Our next report getting you all the details.
Surgical professions are largely dominated by men. According to the Association of American Medical Colleges, only 22.6% of general surgeons in the US are women. America is no exception. Elsewhere in the world too, surgery is predominantly a man's world. But what if we told you that women are better at surgery? We aren't making this claim. These studies are. Here's what they claim. Female surgeons are better because of the difference in technique, speed, and risk-taking. Studies add that when in the operation theatre, female surgeons tend to operate more slowly. This additional time yields better results. How do you define better results? The studies looked at 3 major indicators: the number of medical complications, readmissions to the hospital, and death rates. The study also considered several types of surgical procedures. Surgeries carried out on heart, brain, bones, and blood vessels. When experts studied adverse post-operative events or medical complications after a major surgery, they saw that 13.9% patients treated by male surgeons had complications. On the other hand, 12.5% patients treated by female surgeons reported complications. Patients seen by females fared better even after 1 year of surgery. Only 20.7% of them had adverse post-operative events, while the number increased to 25% patients under male surgeons. If you look at deaths post-surgery, patients treated by male surgeons were 25% more likely to die 1 year after surgery. This is what experts are saying. Men and women differ in how they practice medicine. Embracing or adopting some practices that are more common among female physicians is likely to improve outcomes for my patients. Female surgeons have amplified the importance of the time during an operation. Trying to be the fastest is not always the answer. Medical experts say that The fact that female surgeons had operations with fewer complications but longer operation times suggests that the Navy SEAL mantra, slow is smooth and smooth is fast, also applies to surgery. Studies also point out that female surgeons may also be more empathetic, more patient-centered while making crucial decisions. They may also be willing to be more collaborative and willing to work with others while prioritizing the patient. The study urges a change in perception. According to a 2017 study, when a patient has a bad experience with a female surgeon, they don't go back to the doctor again. But with a male surgeon, they don't mind paying another visit. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
On that note, it's a wrap on this edition of Gravitas Tonight, leaving you with Gravitas Images. Thanks very much for watching.
It's easy to tell you a flat story. It's easy to show you what's happening around the world. We do the difficult part.
This weapon has been banned, but the US, Ukraine and Russia do not find the bombs problematic.
We also tell you why what's happening.
A new drug is making a difference in the fight against Alzheimer's. This medicine helps slow down a patient's cognitive decline.
We look beyond the text. We give you context.
Is China preparing for a war in the Himalayas? And tonight, we